origin of the Tiger I, arguably Germany's most famous tank of the Second World War, is complex. The development started in the mid-1930s when the industrial firm Henschel & Schon was given the task of creating a breakthrough tank by the German military. While in development, new specifications for the tank were given, including a required armor thickness and the use of a 75mm main gun. After the war broke out in 1939, experiences against French and British tanks led to more redesigns, each prototype building off the previous attempts. In 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. Though wildly successful, German tanks had issues dealing with the Soviet tanks, especially the moving bunker that was the KV-1, and the ubiquitous T-34, prompting more redesigns. A competition was held for the new heavy tank that could surpass what the Soviets could throw at them, held between Henschel and Porsche. Henschel won the contest, and the Tiger went into production. The final version was a conglomeration of designs from Henschel & Schon, Porsche, and Krupp. It was given the designation Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger. The Tiger was given the Roman numeral 1 after the introduction of the Tiger II. Dimensions. The Tiger I was a large tank, designed with many features in mind, subtlety not being one of them. It tipped the scales at an impressive 57 metric tons, or just under 63 US tons, classifying it as a heavy tank. For comparison, the rival T-34 weighed between 26 and 35 tons, depending on the version. The Tiger I is just shy of 28 feet in length, with a width of 10.5 feet and 10 feet in height. The Tiger was so massive, it couldn't count on smaller bridges not collapsing, so it had special features to make sure it could ford across a river. These included an airtight hull and turret, a 10-foot-long snorkel, and a pump to bail out leaking water. Armament. The Tiger I was designed to be able to overpower any opposition with ease. The original 75mm main gun was replaced with an 88mm KWK-36 L56 gun, based on the 88mm flak cannon. The high velocity of the projectile could rip through the toughest armor plating that it faced. It was also equipped with two MG-34 machine guns, one mounted in the hull and one coaxial to the main gun. And you can never have too many MG-34s, so one extra could be mounted on the top, which could be used for anti-infantry or anti-aircraft roles. Armor. The Tiger could take a punishment as well as it could dish it out. The frontal armor of the tank was an impressive 100mm in thickness, or about 4 inches. The side armor of the Tiger I was a bit thinner at 80mm, or about 3 inches. The metal used was a homogeneous nickel and steel, which was less brittle than other types of armor and could withstand all but the most powerful anti-tank weapons. The armor was not sloped, giving the Tiger its distinctive boxy appearance. Engine and performance. The first versions of the Tiger I were fitted with the HL210 21-liter V12 Maybach engine, which had a power output of around 650 horsepower. When this proved to be insufficient for a vehicle the size of the Tiger, it was upgraded to an HL230 23-liter Maybach engine, which could generate over 700 horsepower. This could propel the Tiger at a top speed of around 25 miles an hour, though this was the road speed. Over unpaved ground or uneven surfaces, the top speed was greatly reduced. The Tiger was also a thirsty beast, and the 125-gallon fuel tank gave the Tiger an operational range of between 45 and 75 miles, depending on the conditions. Wheels and suspension. The tank rode on 48 interleaved road wheels, a setup that helped distribute the immense weight of the Tiger, giving it surprising mobility for a vehicle of its size, though it made repair difficult, since several layers of wheels had to be removed to reach an inner wheel. The road wheels had an outer lining of rubber, but supply problems forced the Germans to shift to steel wheels in early 1944. These wheels were more sturdy, and engineers were able to remove 16 of the wheels per side in later versions, streamlining production. The wheels were attached to a torsion bar suspension system, and when combined with shock absorbers, this gave the Tiger I a relatively smooth ride. Crew. The Tiger I had a crew of 5. In the hull was the driver on the left, and the radio operator on the right. In the turret was the commander, who was on the back left, the gunner, who was in the front left, and the loader, who was on the right side. Since the Tiger was the premier vehicle in the German arsenal, the crews were hand-selected for their ability and were even sent to the Henschel factories in order to learn the intricacies and maintenance of the tank. Production. The first Tigers were ordered in April 1942, with the first batch sent into combat in August of that year. Due to wartime needs, the production was rushed in order to get them to the front as fast as possible. Because of this, the Tiger I was modified multiple times over its production run, with each new version working out the flaws in the design on the go. Almost every month, a new feature would be added, modified, or removed. The Tiger was also expensive, with each tank costing around 250,000 Reichsmarks. For comparison, the Panzer V Panther cost about half as much. It also took about 300,000 man-hours of labor to build one Tiger, almost twice that of a Panther. Because of these limitations, only around 1,354 Tiger I tanks were built. Production lasted from April 1942 until August 1944, when the Tiger was phased out in favor of the Tiger II. There were alternative variants, including a command vehicle which had extra radios. More famous was the Sturmtiger, or Assault Tiger, which mounted a gargantuan 380mm mortar, which was designed to simply flatten enemy positions. There was also a Tiger with winch equipment, though there was only one known to have that feature, so it was probably an improvised retrofitting rather than a dedicated vehicle type. The Tiger in battle. The first batch of Tigers to roll off the assembly line were sent to the Eastern Front near Leningrad in August of 1942, and had their first major combat operation at the Great Tank Battle of Kursk in 1943. There were some flaws with the Tiger I that plagued an otherwise effective vehicle. It was a complex machine that suffered numerous mechanical failures. The most common issues were from faulty gearbox or engine failures. Many Tigers had to be abandoned after catastrophic breakdowns. Looking at other German tanks of the war, there might be a bit of a theme here. When they were operational, however, there was no tank that struck fear into the heart of the enemy quite like the Tiger. The Allies would watch in horror as the 88mm gun would rip through even the toughest tank with ease, and their return fire bounced harmlessly off the Tiger's hull. Though it was designed as a breakout vehicle, as the war turned against Germany, the Tiger was used defensively, ambushing columns of Allied tanks, causing absolute havoc. A single Tiger in an advantageous position with an experienced crew could devastate enemy formations, vastly outnumbering it. In one example, Tiger ace Michael Wittmann destroyed 14 British tanks, 15 APCs, and 2 anti-tank guns in under 15 minutes. Stories like these fueled Tiger phobia, where Allied tank crews lived in perpetual fear of encountering one right up until the end of the war. This was so rampant that Tigers were blamed for destroying Allied vehicles, even when the actual culprit was a different kind of tank or even an anti-tank gun. The fear generated by the Tiger far outweighed its actual effectiveness on the battlefield, a legacy that was cemented in Hollywood films that emphasized its superiority over its adversaries. Even today, the myth persists that it would take 5 Allied tanks to knock out a single Tiger. Today, only a handful of Tigers remain, and only one in operational condition, Tiger 131, located at the Tank Museum in Bovington in the UK.
The last working Tiger tank in the world. Not many weapons, vehicles, or aircraft of the World War II era have gained the iconic status that the Tiger tank did. It has a reputation that stands to this day. Just to see one of these beasts standing in a museum display is an experience. However, there is one that can be seen in action. It's the last working Tiger tank in the world, Tiger 131 of the Tank Museum in Bovington, England. The baptism of fire for the Tiger tank was in autumn of 1942 on the Eastern Front, when a platoon of 4 Tigers were sent to the Leningrad Front. In December of the same year, the Tigers were sent to the North African Front in Tunisia, where the Germans were trying to stop the Allied offensive. This was where Tiger 131 was deployed. The Tiger 131 came down the assembly line at the Henschel factory in Kassel in February 1943. It was painted in dunkelgelb, dark yellow, and was assigned the serial number 250122. Along with the other Tiger tanks, 131 was mounted on a railway carriage and transported to the port of Trapani, Sicily. Over there, they embarked on Cybele ferries, a motorized raft used by the Germans for transport. The final destination was Tunis, North Africa. Once the tanks arrived in Tunis in mid-March, they had their narrow tracks mounted for transport by railway removed and replaced with wider ones intended for use on the soft terrain of the desert. Parts that were disassembled for easier transport were then reassembled. The now ready-for-battle tanks were then deployed to the 504th Heavy Tank Battalion of the 5th Panzer Army. Tiger 131 was deployed to the 1st Company, 3rd Platoon, as the first tank of the platoon commander, hence its 131 designation, which was painted red on both sides of the turret. The first task for Tiger Tank 131 and its 1st Company was to reinforce the German positions at the Sfax-Magnassi area. By now, the Tunisian campaign was in its final stage. British and American troops were advancing towards the city of Tunis, the last stronghold of the Axis in Africa. On April 21st, in order to withhold the advance of the British Army, the Germans launched Operation Lilac Blossom. The aim of the operation was to counterattack the British advancing from the region around the hill called Jebel Jaffa. Tank 131 was just one of the tanks that participated in the operation in what was to be a decisive battle. For Tiger 131, the war ended right there and then during the last German defense before the Tunisian capital. Almost completely intact, it would end up in British hands. There's a small shroud of mystery on how this happened, as for 75 years it was believed that the tank was captured on the slopes of Jebel Jaffa, while it actually happened 10 miles northeast of there, on a smaller hill known as Point 174, also known as Girat el Attah. Point 174 came into the center of events after the British managed to defeat the Germans in the Battle of Longstop Hill on April 22nd and 23rd, 1943. The British concentrated their attack on Point 174 and the nearby Point 156, west of the town of Mejezelbab. After their attacks were repelled on April 23rd, a new one commenced the following day. Point 174 was attacked by the 2nd Sherwood Foresters and Point 156 by the 1st King Shropshire Light Infantry. Both battalions were supported by a composite tank battalion under the command of the 142nd Royal Armoured Corps. The 1st King Shropshire Light Infantry were quicker to capture their objective, but did it with heavy casualties. The 2nd Foresters also had many casualties, but with much more difficulty in seizing the top of Point 174. On the afternoon of April 24th, the Foresters finally seized the crest, only to be attacked by German tanks in a hull-down position from a distance of 300 yards. The Foresters bravely withheld the Tiger's intense shelling, so then one of the Tigers decided to leave its position and head for Point 174. It was Tiger 131. Once it arrived on the top of the hill, panic broke out. The tank was fired upon from all sides. Infantrymen were firing bursts from their small arms and projectiles from their anti-tank Piats. Some of the Foresters managed to capture a French 75mm gun and started firing on Tiger 131. Finally, the supporting Churchill tanks of the B Squadron of the 48th Royal Tank Regiment and the Ad Hoc Squadron of the 142 Royal Armoured Corps opened fire from the neighboring hill, Point 151. In this raining hail of bullets and shells, Tiger 131 suddenly stopped. One of the shells hit the Tiger's gun barrel and ricocheted into the turret ring and jammed the turret. Another shot then impacted the turret lifting lug, disabling the gun's elevation device. Then a final third shot hit the loader's hatch, deflecting shrapnel into the turret. The crew of the Tiger, probably wounded and panic-stricken, decided to evacuate the tank. There was a doubt as to whether it was a shell from the French 75mm gun or from the Churchill's 6-pounder gun that disabled the turret. The latest research by experts from the Tank Museum at Bovington showed that it was most likely the shell from one of the Churchills from Point 151 that stopped the tank. Even today, impact damage from 57mm shells and .303 bullets are evident on the tank. The Foresters remained on Point 174 for the next 6 days, along with the captured Tiger 131. On May 7th, the 104th Army Tank Workshop arrived at Point 174 and recovered the Tiger from the battlefield. After it was repaired and put back into working order, the tank was towed away to Tunis on May 24th, which by that time was liberated by Allied troops. The German cross was removed, and a shield of the 1st Army and the Diabolo of the 21st Army Tank Brigade were painted at the front of the hull. While in Tunisia, it was displayed to King George VI and Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who desired to see this beast of a tank. The captured Tiger Tank 131 was a magnificent war trophy for the British, who decided to transfer it to England. The tank was driven to La Goulette Harbor and ferried to Bizerta on August 3, 1943. In Bizerta, the tank embarked on the SS Empire Candida and sailed to Bonn, from where it was transferred to Glasgow on board the SS Ocean Strength. It finally arrived in the UK on October 8th. In the UK, Tiger 131 started a new life. Before it was taken to the Department of Tank Design in Chertsey, Surrey, it was displayed at the Horse Guards in London and even had a public display tour around the country. The show, however, didn't last long, as experts from the tank department laid their hands on it, subjecting it to thorough examination. The tank was stripped of the majority of the important parts, such as its engine, gearbox, and many others. It was in such a condition that it was ultimately put aside, as by the end of the war an interest in further research was lost. Finally, on September 25, 1951, the tank was handed over to the Tank Museum at Bovington. Over there, Tiger 131 spent almost 4 decades at the museum as a static display until a team of restorers decided to bring it back to life. In a highly demanding project, Tiger 131 was stripped to pieces with the majority of its original parts returned back in place after refurbishment. Some components, such as wiring, were replaced with modern versions, while some had to be completely remanufactured. Its breath of life was an in-working order Maybach HL-230 engine taken from another Tiger tank to replace the original HL-210 engine that was scrapped by engineers at the Department of Tank Design. Finally, the tank was painted in a proper paint scheme with all the original German markings restored. The end result is the greatest attraction of the Tank Museum, the only fully operating Tiger tank in the world. On the now famous Tiger Days, museum visitors have the opportunity to see in action one of the most famous tanks in history.
Nazi tanks, they have a reputation for outclassing Allied tanks, but even the best machines need someone to operate it. This is the story of one of the most famous, or infamous, German tank aces of World War II, the Black Baron. War breaks out in 1939, and Michael Wittmann, the son of a farmer, is part of a reconnaissance unit where he drives an armored car. Not exactly a tank, but he has to start somewhere. He and the rest of his unit fight through Poland before being transferred west, participating in the campaigns against Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. After these engagements in early 1941, Wittmann is retrained as a commander of mechanized artillery, and he turns in his armored car, Fürsturmgeschütz 3. This vehicle is not a tank, but more accurately, an assault gun, the 75mm main gun fixed to the hull without a turret. It's in one of these assault guns that Wittmann fights in Greece, where his leadership and abilities earn him the Iron Cross 2nd class. After fighting in Greece, Wittmann and the rest of his unit are sent to Czechoslovakia to rearm and refit for their next operation. June 22, 1941, 3.5 million German soldiers are kicking off Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Wittmann and the rest of the 1st SS Panzer Division are attached to Field Marshal Gerd von Brunstedt's Army Group South. Wittmann once again proves to be a capable leader, and though he is wounded, he also displays incredible ability, destroying 6 Soviet tanks in a single engagement. In a few short months, he's credited with 66 enemy tank kills. Wittmann is then sent back to Germany, where he undergoes more intensive tank training and is promoted to lieutenant and placed in charge of a tank platoon. His vehicle also changes, first to a Panzer III, but soon this is replaced by something much more substantial. The Panzerkampfwagen 6, better known as the Tiger I, is a behemoth of a tank, with a powerful 88mm main gun that can rip through virtually any enemy it faces, and has armor up to 120mm thick, making it all but impervious to whatever is thrown at it. Wittmann again joins the front lines in 1943 and first tastes combat in his new Tiger during Operation Citadel, better known as the Battle of Kursk, arguably the largest tank battle ever fought. With such a powerful tank at his disposal, Wittmann goes on a rampage, cutting a swath of destruction through the Soviets. On the first day of the battle, he destroys 13 Soviet T-34s and 2 anti-tank guns, and follows up this feat by adding 10 more tanks, 3 light tanks, 2 self-propelled guns, 3 anti-tank guns, and a field artillery piece over the course of the next few days. He also survives a collision with a burning T-34, his driver managing to speed away before the ammunition touches off and the tank explodes. In spite of Wittmann's and the rest of the German efforts, the Red Army is able to withstand the offensive, and Operation Citadel is a failure. After a brief time to refit and recuperate, Wittmann and the rest of his unit are again sent to the front. His skills are put to the test, and he racks up an impressive kill total. By January 1944, he is credited with knocking out 88 enemy tanks, artillery pieces, and other vehicles, and is awarded the Knight's Cross. By the end of the month, his total reaches 117 enemy vehicles. In May 1944, Wittmann is transferred to occupied France in preparation for the Allied invasion of France. When the Allies launched the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, Wittmann and the 6 Tiger tanks in his unit redeployed to the area, arriving on June 12. It's here that Wittmann achieves the most famous exploit of his career. June 13, 1944, Wittmann and the rest of his men are stationed near the town of Villers-Bocage, defending a piece of ground called Hill 213. It's early in the morning, and the 4th County of London Yeomanry are advancing toward the hill where the Tiger tanks are waiting. They, along with a supporting infantry company, are trying to secure the roadway for a push to the city of Caen, though the thick vegetation of the Normandy countryside lowers their visibility. In total, Wittmann has his own Tiger, 3 other Tigers, and a Panzer IV. Against them are about 60 British tanks, half-tracks, gun carriers, and anti-tank guns. While others may have been uneasy being outnumbered more than 10 to 1, Wittmann finds himself in a target-rich environment. Leaving the rest of his men to face the front of the British column, he swings around to the rear of the British undetected. At about 9 a.m., the British hear a panicked call over the radio.
Good God, we have to get out of here. There's a Tiger tank that's progressing about 50 meters from us.
Bursting from the undergrowth like its namesake, Wittmann's Tiger falls on the rear of the British column, immediately blasting a Cromwell tank to scrap, followed shortly by a Firefly and then 3 tanks. Wittmann moves parallel to the roadway, using the Tiger's powerful 88mm gun to blast tanks, half-tracks, gun carriers, and whatever else gets into his sights. The British return fire, but their shells are more of an annoyance than a threat. He then advances on Villers-Bocage, racking up more kills. The entire engagement lasts for about 15 minutes, and when the dust settles, the Germans have knocked out 13 to 14 tanks, 13 to 15 transport vehicles, and 2 anti-tank guns. Other German units continue the fight for Villers-Bocage, which is a debacle for the British advance. But Wittmann plays no further part in the battle after being disabled by an anti-tank gun that hits the Tiger's drive wheel. For his actions that day, he's awarded the Sword Edition to his Knight's Cross, and is promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer, or Captain. He spends the next 2 months fighting the Allied advance across France. On August 8th, he participates in a counterattack near the town of Saint-Aignan-du-Crémenil, where his unit is ambushed by a British and Canadian tank force. A fateful blow ignites the ammunition in Wittmann's Tiger, killing the crew and blowing the turret completely off. Wittmann is buried in a communal grave before being positively identified in 1983. His remains are reburied at the German military cemetery at La Combe in Normandy. Michael Wittmann's legacy is complicated to say the least. In total, he is one of, if not the most successful tank aces of all time, with around 138 enemy tanks and 132 artillery pieces to his credit. His exploits are still studied and discussed today. It is important to remember that a tank is not operated by a single man, but rather a crew, and Wittmann's crew was among the best in the German armed forces. Specifically, Wittmann relied heavily on his gunner Balthasar Voll, who wielded the main gun like a sniper rifle, able to hit targets while on the move, an exceedingly difficult feat in an era before gyro stabilizers. At the same time, there are many who are skeptical about his record. Many believe that his totals were exaggerated, and there's no doubt that his actions were used as German propaganda, which makes the truth difficult to determine. There have also been some to suggest that he was reckless and foolhardy, advancing alone against the enemy without support from other members of his unit, like he did at Villers-Bocage. It's also believed that his reputation owes more to the durability of the Tiger I than any skill on his part. The thick armor was impervious to all but the most powerful anti-tank weapons, so enemy tanks weren't that much of a threat to him. After transferring to the Western Front, Wittmann was killed in action after 2 months, where he faced tanks with more powerful guns that could tear through the Tiger's armor. Regardless of the truth, Michael Wittmann is still remembered as arguably the greatest tank ace in history, his story sparking countless debates and discussions decades after his death. Japanese Tiger Tank. It's the end of 1940. Germany, Italy, and Japan don't want the US to join World War II and ruin all their conquest plans. So they decided to make an alliance. It was agreed, if anyone not in the war right now decides to attack us that happen to have a big army, lots of troops, and is overseas, and sometimes likes to wear pointy cowboy hats, that would firstly be a very uncool thing to do. But secondly, we three will fight back together as one, so you really definitely shouldn't do that. This didn't work. The US started helping the alliance's enemies, Britain and China, even more, but the pact did open the door for a good old collab between Germany and Japan, who began sharing military tech, such as, you guessed it, the Tiger tank. The countries had already worked together before. During the early days of the war, the two countries frequently shared industrial production patents and weapons blueprints. It was largely the Japanese who benefited the greatest from this collaboration, as there was a lot to be learned from the Germans. The Japanese were interested in a variety of German tech, including planes, rockets, submarines, and others. However, once the tides of war began to turn, they also began to pay particular attention to the infamous German tank designs. They were most impressed by one particular design, the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Ausführung H1, or more commonly known as the Tiger tank. As the Allies were nearing the main Pacific Islands towards the end of the war, the Japanese were eager to get the Tigers in their arsenal. At the beginning of World War II, the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces was one of the most formidable fighting powers in the world. Compared to the naval force, though, the Imperial Japanese Army was considerably less developed. This wasn't a result of inadequacy, however, but rather the pre- and early war conditions that had not required the Japanese to build a more powerful army than it already had. The weapons and equipment in the Imperial Japanese Army's inventory was sufficient to defeat its enemies in China and Southeast Asia, and to keep the territories under control. As for the war in the Pacific Islands, the Japanese command decided that lighter weapons and equipment were far better suited for the difficult environment, as well as being cheaper and easier to transport on ships. The Japanese government was keen to maintain a strict budget with the army, and rather invest the majority of finances into its high-priority Navy and Air Force. The Imperial Japanese Army's tank fleet was limited to tankettes, light tanks, and medium tanks. The most widely produced Japanese tank was the Type 97 Chiha medium tank, as well as its improved turret version, the Type 97 Kaishin Hoto Chinha. A 4-crew tank armed with a 57mm gun, the Type 97 was a relatively small medium tank, but it served its purpose in the Pacific Campaign. The Japanese soon learned that their tanks were far inferior when in 1943 the Americans introduced the M4 Sherman medium tanks to the Pacific theater of war, which soon became the dominant armor in the Far East, outperforming any adversary. It had become apparent to senior Japanese military officials that when the Americans were to launch their inevitable attacks on the key Japanese-held islands of the Pacific, the Imperial Army would struggle immensely to counter the now superior American armored units. They therefore needed a more powerful tank, and so they turned to their European allies, the Germans, for help. The Japanese ambassador in Berlin, General Hiroshi Oshima, was tasked with making a deal with the Germans on purchasing blueprints along with an example tank that could suit the new Japanese needs. In early 1943, they bought two versions of the Panzer III, one armed with a 50mm gun and another with a 75mm gun. By the time the tanks were transported to Japan and reached their destination, however, they were already obsolete. Not even the Panzer IV was capable of meeting their pressing demands. The Japanese were looking for something far more powerful. General Hiroshi Oshima had previously visited German troops fighting on the Eastern Front and had come away extremely impressed with the Tiger tanks. It was soon decided that this was precisely the tank the Japanese needed to fight the Shermans. So in May of 1943, General Oshima approached the Germans with a proposal to buy a blueprint and an example of a Tiger I along with ammunition. The Japanese ambassador was invited to the Henschel factory to learn more about the production process and the technical requirements for producing such a tank. The German engineers were explicit in explaining that the production of the Tiger tank would require far more than simply buying a blueprint. The Japanese were to ensure that the industry and materials used were compatible with the Tiger tank's production requirements. After a series of discussions, the Japanese finally purchased an example of a Tiger I, chassis number 250455, for 645,000 Reichsmarks, or about $258,000. Ironically, the German government only paid 300,000 Reichsmarks per vehicle. The Japanese were likely charged more, as this was the actual commercial cost of the tank. In comparison to the Tiger I, the production cost of a Type 97 Chiha without armament was roughly 126,000 yen, or about $33,800. The Tiger tanks were to allow the Japanese to make a giant leap in tank technology. By all of its features, the Tiger was far superior to anything in the Japanese arsenal, including the best armor they had, the Type 97 Kai medium tank. First of all, with a weight of 60 tons, the Tiger was more than 3 times heavier than the Type 97 Kai, which weighed only 18 tons. The Tiger I also had significantly thicker armor than the Type 97. Its frontal hull and turret armor was 100 millimeters thick, hull side plates 60 millimeters, and its turret sides and rear was 80 millimeters. The Tiger had one of the most powerful armaments of World War II, the 8.8-centimeter Kampfwagenkanone 36. Compared to it, the Type 97 47mm gun was far weaker and often struggled to penetrate American armor. The Tiger's Panzergranate 40 armor-piercing round, on the other hand, could penetrate up to 171mm thick steel armor. It's hard to predict how much Japan would have benefited from having their own version of the Tiger I. Would it have made a big difference defending Manchuria later against the Soviets, or with countering the island, leapfrogging US tanks in the Pacific? Before this could have been known, the Japanese officials soon realized how much of a logistical challenge it was to transport these mighty vehicles across the vast distance from Germany to Japan. The Germans and the Japanese had previous experience in transporting weapons and equipment they exchanged, but this was to be an unprecedented task. In most cases, an item would be disassembled into smaller parts and shipped across the sea in a submarine. The problem with the Tiger was that it was simply too large for this, even when disassembled. The largest problem was its giant hull, which weighed almost 30 tons. In addition to this, by this time, the Allied navies had enormous control over which ships were to pass across the oceans between Europe and Japan. Nevertheless, the Japanese Tiger was shipped to Bordeaux as the plans for its shipping were arranged. Its journey was soon abruptly cut off when in June 1944 the Allies launched their invasion of Europe. The Germans were to mobilize all the forces at their disposal. An idle Tiger heavy tank in the port of Bordeaux was a luxury they couldn't afford to ignore. And so on September 21st, the Japanese agreed to loan their Tiger to the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, later renamed the 501st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion. It's after these events that the fate of the tank becomes largely unknown. It's generally believed that the tank was destroyed by Allied forces during the chaotic German retreat across France. Despite enormous efforts and grand monetary spendings from the Japanese, the tank was never to arrive on the shores of Japan, as it was never to see combat in the Pacific Theater, fighting underneath the flag of the rising sun.